Solo backpacked into the middle of nowhere, Mogollon Rim, Arizona. This was in high elevation, very wet Arizona, and not the desert most people are familiar with, around 700-500 feet, and the area looks more like the wet areas of the Pacific Northwest than anything else. Super remote. Remote enough that I didn't see another soul, and saw evidence of old pot grows, all several years old, and nothing recent, thankfully. Pot growers can be dangerous if you stumble into one of their illegal little farms. The first night, I camped on an, almost, flat bench of ground above a creek. A bench, in this context, is a large ledge of ground. The bench was about the size of a large living room. I had a brush-covered cliff behind me, impossible to move around on without making noise, and a sheer undercut by past floods. Drop off to the creek in front of me. Other than the faint sound of trickling water, it was a dead, quiet night. The kind of night you can literally hear a mouse scurrying around in the undergrowth. It was utterly, absolutely quiet, and it was overcast on a new moon, so absolutely dark. The area was heavily overgrown with thorny bushes, wild strawberries, and ferns. There was a thick canopy of trees overhead, so thick I had a hard time getting a signal out with my satellite communicator to report in to family. Sabai messaged them every evening when hiking alone. The only way up to the bench was a narrow, steep game trail that through thick brush. You couldn't get up to that bench without making a ton of noise by knocking rocks loose and breaking branches. Did I mention it was quiet? It was spooky quiet. No birds during the day, no frogs peeping, no crickets or cicadas, nothing. Dead quiet except for that faint sound of trickling water. It was the kind of quiet where the loudest noise is the sound of your own heartbeat in your ears. In the middle of the night, a bright white light illuminates my tent for a couple minutes. I figured I had a human midnight visitor, possibly up to no good, and I scrambled out of my tent in a hurry. The light disappeared as I unzipped the tent. It's still absolutely dead quiet. I shine my, very good, flashlight around and find nothing. No humans. I listen with the light off and hear nothing. And then off, through the trees, I see a faint flickering white light. It isn't a flashlight. It's more like a glow. Had it not been so very dark, I might not have seen anything at all. On a moonlit night, I might have thought it was a particularly bright patch of moonlight. It disappeared after a minute. There was no sound, and I would have heard footsteps if it was anything alive. I was just glad it wasn't an axe murderer, an illegal pot grower, or space aliens. Lull. I sat up until dawn and there were no other noises. It remained eerily silent. Not even a cricket. In the morning, there were no footprints and no sign anyone had been there. The dawn birds never sang as the sun started to come up. There never were any insect noises. I've vowed never to camp on that creepy bench again. I repost this in these types of threads. Here's my story of a dude I happened to come across in the deep woods in FL though. Let me know if you find it interesting. Ocala National Forest, Florida. I probably came across either a poacher's camp or a drug operation, and they put signs up to scare people away. Me and a friend were hunting there and stayed out past midnight looking for hogs. We realized we were way deeper in the woods than we planned on and began to walk out. We were probably 3 or 4 miles into the woods from the main road. We were walking in the dark, heavily armed with AR-15s, sidearms, and fixed-blade hunting knives in a hip sheath. So we really weren't afraid of anything, plus the moon was bright enough to navigate by even under the trees. We had lights mounted on our rifles and I had a large, powerful flashlight in my hand that I could make into a strobe or use as a club. Whatever, the point is, we were not paranoid of anything. We were heading back, and we start to hear something hauling through the woods on our right, and it was about to cross the trail in front of us. Most trails are old logging roads, are pretty wide, and they make square quadrants out of the forest. This particular trail cut across one of the quadrants and was overgrown and thin. We thought it was a deer or maybe a black bear. Either way, we couldn't shoot it at night. so instead of using the rifle lights, I used my handheld light. We waited until we heard it get near the trail. Then I turned on my light. All we saw was a pair of white legs cross the thin trail about 50 feet in front of us. They looked human. We were a little baffled, like what moron goes crashing through the deep woods at 1 a.m. in shorts, and through the thick brush, not the trail. Super weird. But, again, and armed as we were for hogs, we pushed on because it would have taken like 30 minutes extra to turn back and go around the quadrant we hear crashing now and then in the woods, but it never got close to us again. Finally, we reached my car, and I was relieved it was still there and not broken into or anything. We keep the rifles loaded, shove our handguns between the seat and center console, and get in the front seat. I begin to drive out of the forest with my moonroof open, and the stars were just gorgeous. It's easy to forget how amazing the night sky is in the middle of Ocala National. About half a mile down the road, my headlights fall onto a man in a checkered, button-down shirt and shorts just walling along the road. We are miles from any paved road, and then it's another 5 or 10 miles on the paved road to get to a town. Also, this in the northern part of the forest, where there are no old cabins that were built before it was declared a national park. This dude had no backpack or anything. Was this what we saw cross the path? Nutty Fef was he doing walking out here at 1:32 am with no supplies, no flashlight, nothing? He didn't even look at us as we passed. Anyway, as we got near the paved road, we unloaded the rifles and put them in the trunk and went home. It was a really fun trip, and I can't wait to go back. But it'll always be armed in Ocala Nationals. Some seriously weird shit goes on out there. Sorry for the novella. I was traveling solo around the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State and making various stops in the Olympic National Park. I decided to stop in Quinault for the first time and took a random road that dead-ended at a beautiful spot at the edge of the Quinault River. There was an ancient footbridge that led across the river, but it looked like it might collapse if I tried to cross it, so I decided not to. It was off-season and I was not in a tourist area. I was the only one there. It was so unusually hot outside that I decided that I needed to get in that water. I backed my car all the way to the edge of the dead-end road, faced it out in the direction I would need to leave, and started hiking through thick brush, down an embankment. To the edge of the water, there was no path. It was a pretty rugged area. It was mid-fall and I didn't have a suit since I didn't plan on swimming, so I just took my clothes off and got in the water in my bra and underwear. I had a nice swim, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched even though I was in the middle of nowhere. After about 5 minutes, the creepy feeling was enough for me to want to head back, so I started to climb out, turned my back to the other side of the river, and walked toward my clothes and shoes that I had left behind. When I turned around, there was a big, tall man standing in plain view, just across from me on the other side of the river, but higher up on his embankment than I was on mine. He was wearing a poncho made of animal pelts, had long hair full of sticks and twigs, and looked like he had been living out in the wild for a very long time. We stood and stared at each other, me in frozen terror, for what felt like forever, when all of a sudden he frantically took off in the direction of the fudge leading across the water. I grabbed my car key, tried to grab my clothes and shoes, but they got tangled up in some blackberry vines, so I left everything and went running for my life, through the thick brush and blackberries, barefoot in my underwear, trying to make it to my car before he made it across the river. There was no doubt in my mind that he was trying to harm me. When I made it out of the blackberries, I could see he was crossing the bridge toward me rapidly. I got to my car and flung my door open just as he arrived. I locked the doors while he pounded on the hood of my car, just screaming and grunting non-verbally. The moment he went for my driver's side door, I hit the gas and took off as fast as I could. I looked back and he was chasing after me. He must have run after my car for at least a mile until he faded from view. I was bleeding everywhere from running nearly naked through blackberries. I was wet, unclothed, shaking and crying. Had I hesitated for literally 10 seconds longer, I don't think I would have made it out alive. Even typing this story out again, all these years later, I am starting to shake. I felt like I was being hunted. That is the only way I can describe it. I will never, ever go back to that area. Since that moment, I always bring a hiking buddy with me when I venture out into the forest. That day is going to haunt me for life. I have had many years of therapy, and that experience is still as vivid as the day it happened. I'm not really sure if this is the kind of thing that gets posted here or not, but I figured I'd see if I can get some opinions on something that happened to me while out camping nearby Mount Rainier National Park. I can't remember exactly what happened as the events are kind of hazy. I went to a van life meetup in Enumclaw, WA over the weekend. The city is close by NT, Rainier National Park, and because I had already made the trip, I figured I might as well camp overnight nearby the park in a dispersed camping spot in the forest. I brought some ingredients to make carne asada tacos, downloaded some movies, and was ready for a nice cozy evening in my van, something which I do on most weekends in various campsites around the state. I hiked around the campsite, which was very nice save for the large amounts of trash, which was littered about, which actually made me really sad. The trail led to 2 fire pits not too far from where I had parked, and it ended at a quiet riverbank. It seemed like it was a spot that local teens might go to drink and smoke weed. There was even a log bench with the words 420 painted colorfully on its seat. I wasn't sure how recently people had been here, and there were open, half-drink cans around the fire pits what seemed cold. I wasn't quite sure if this meant anything in the moment, but it was a bit on the warmer side outside at around 70 degrees. I decided that it likely wasn't an active camp and stayed. The spot wasn't terribly isolated. Every 30 minutes or so someone would drive by to claim other campsites down the lonely fire road, some trucks, and even an RV. People like me looking to spend time out in nature and who don't want to shell out the extra cash for a campsite. After exploring the area, I went back to my van to start making dinner. I used a satellite communicator to check in with my friends and family, as I didn't have any service this deep into the forest. The sun was setting as I sat down to eat my tacos. I left my doors open to let the air flow, and the cool breeze felt amazing. But after eating and when it was quiet, I started noticing a sound in the distance. They sounded like gunshots, really almost like cannon shots. Deep, rhythmic booms echoing in the valley every few seconds. What accompanied those sounds was a still distant, yet closer noises of a chainsaw in the distance. Now neither of these noises are very uncommon to hear when camping on fire roads, to be honest. People in Washington love their guns, and it wouldn't be unheard of for someone to use a chainsaw to cut down larger trunks into firewood, summer fire ban be damned. I also saw some campers start to leave, including an RV, which was particularly unusual. Finding a campsite for an RV can be hard, but it is why hard to find one at night. The rule is to always find camp before the sun sets, and the sun had only just disappeared from the sky. Something spooked them, and I wondered if it would be wise to follow their lead. However, I had unwashed dishes on the counter, and I was in no mood to move. And so I didn't. I did, however, triple check that all my doors and windows were locked before drifting to sleep. That night can only be described as hazy and disorienting. I have very little memory of anything that happened, but the evidence that something had most definitely happened was very evident. I remember being awake in the pitch black of night, struggling to breathe. Not choking. My lungs were filling with air, but I remember the feeling of drowning. I remember the pleading desperation for air. I remember trying to see with my sight being wholly consumed by the darkness in front of me. I have a memory of trying to punch out a window to no avail. I remember making my way to the side doors of my van to open the door to breathe. And then I woke up in bed and the sun was in the sky. I would have chalked this to a really bad dream, but the damage around me was evident. There was definitely a struggle. Some of my window blinds were sliced and ruined. One of my windows had scratch marks from the inside. Even the air vent on my ceiling was obliterated from the inside. My curtain rack was pulled down from the ceiling, which was screwed into a beam. I didn't think I was even capable of this. The van was well ventilated, so I am unsure as to why I would have trouble breathing in the first place. My carbon monoxide detector was silent, and the van was well ventilated after cooking. I have no idea what possible could have caused me to do this and ruin my lovely van. I saw no indication of any kind of forced entry, and all the damage was done from the inside by me trying to get out, I guess. My knuckles were very sore, as were my feet, as I probably hit them hard on the various cabinets in the van on my way out. A pole I used to prop up my canopy was strangely out of place in the middle of the floor and broken at the ends. I have never had any form of night terrors or sleepwalking before this, except for one incident, also nearby Mount Rainier National Park. A few months ago, my friends and I were driving through Enumclaw trying to find a camping spot we might be able to post up at. It was nighttime already, and as I said before, finding camp at night can be pretty difficult. We were driving down the same road I had taken for my recent trip, and we had gotten a tip from a local about a mountain which had some good dispersed camping. We were tired and hungry and just wanted to start setting up camp. We passed a few spots, mostly mud and rock, none too level and none too appealing. We decided to pick the least muddy spot we could find, and I helped them set up their tents. It was one of my first trips in my van, and I was excited to test it out. As we were setting up camp, we heard the wind blowing ominously through the trees, causing them to creak loudly, threatening us with a fall. And this particular area of the mountain was very unleveled in the most unsettling way, so we thus referred to this campsite as the ominous slant. When we slept that night, a few things of note happened. My friend Melissa claims to have heard squeaking noises as if someone were wearing a latex bodysuit. She refers to the sound as the happy gimper. Kurt, her boyfriend, swears he heard a bear that night. However, the worst of it was when, in the middle of the night, they both heard me yell bloody murder from my van. Kurt rushed out of the tent, tripping a few times in his haste, and rushed over to swing open the doors. But I was asleep. He asked what was wrong, and he thought that someone was attacking me. I had no idea what he was talking about. I have no memory at all of any nightmares preceding it or anything. I have no idea what any of this means. I've been on many trips in the van since with different people, and nothing like this has happened anywhere else. It has only happened when I've been in Mount Rainier National Park. To be honest, thinking about the feeling of drowning in darkness makes me very much not want to revisit the subject anytime soon. So I don't believe I'll be visiting the park anytime in the near future for camping either. This isn't the craziest thing I've seen on these type of posts, but it's still something I can't explain. This past year I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. There was about 600 miles of the trail I hiked camped alone. One of these sections I was alone was in Northern California, slightly north of Shasta. I got to a beautiful spot and knew it was the best spot to set up camp. It was gorgeous. 360 views of woods in the valley below and mountains everywhere. I could see it raining on Mount Shasta. Probably my favorite campsite in NorCal. I still remember the exact mile and have some footage of the site during daylight. I set up my tent, and after admiring the sunset, I went to bed. I could see outside below the vestibule when I was lying down in the tent. As I was trying to go to sleep, I saw a white light in the valley, maybe about a quarter to a half mile away. Not right near my tent or anything, I wasn't close to any towns. In the Sierra Mountains, south of this area, I would see an occasional remote cabin in the woods, so I figured it was that. But there were no access points or dirt roads, no forest clearings, just thick woods surrounded by mountains. I looked at the light for a bit and tried to think of what it could have been, but this was pretty remote, so I didn't know. I was tired from hiking all day, so I didn't think too much of it. A little later I looked out again and noticed another light. It was an orange light slowly circling the white light. It was slowly morphing in shape as it circled. I watched it for a long time trying to understand what I was looking at. It had a very calm motion and it was almost mesmerizing. It wasn't like a lot of people's orb UFO experiences where it darts around and then vanishes. I eventually fell asleep. It started raining around midnight and I looked out of my tent and still saw both lights, one white stationary light and one orange morphing light. I woke up again around 4 a.m. to piss and walked outside my tent and it was still there, same motion. I tried to get a video, but due to the distance and darkness, it looked like another shitty video that didn't show anything. I woke up around sunrise and looked for it, but both lights were gone. I didn't see these lights around sunset or sunrise, only in darkness. I know these would have been visible during sunrisey sunset too. I'm sure there is an explanation, but I genuinely have no clue what I was looking at. Still trying to figure it out, unrelated, but near that area I was walking, and to the right of the trail was some thick brush, maybe 5-6 feet tall. This was near the Shasta Trinity Forest area, maybe 1-2 days after the lights in the woods. I was hiking alone, and I noticed about 100 feet away from the brush was being flattened by something, and it was moving very quickly. It was approaching the trail and was going to end up right next to me if I had continued my pace. I couldn't see what was flattening this brush, but it had to be strong. It reminded me of something you'd see in Jurassic Park. I assumed it was a bear. I still think it was, but I didn't want to surprise the bear and have a close encounter. I yelled, "Stop!" And then it stopped, completely. I remained still and waited to see what was going on, but it was completely still. And it was really quiet everywhere, total silence. I got pretty unsettled and started talking to whatever it was while I walked by. I just kept saying things like, "I am going to walk by and be on my way, my friend. Hope you're having a good day." I kept walking and kept looking back, but nothing moved from that point onward. Like I said, probably a bear. Black bears are generally like big raccoons and don't want to interact with humans. But I encountered a few bears and they always ran away when I told them to get lost. After speaking with other hikers, I noticed I met a few people said how NorCal was a little unsettling. The Sokol Desert is very windy and the Sierra Mountains have tons of flowing streams. NorCal doesn't have as many streams or as much wind, so there is just a silence that pervades, which can feel ominous, especially in the dark. That's my explanation for the feeling, at least. But after going through the Sokol Desert, Sierra Mountains, NorCal, Oregon, and Washington, NorCal was the only section that was a little unnerving to me. And I did portions of each of these sections alone also. 3 friends and I hiked the Heart Lake Trail in Yellowstone 2 summers ago. If you've ever been to Heart Lake, you know it's one of the more remote areas in the lower 48, about 11 miles from the closest road. This wasn't our first foray into grizzly country for multiple overnight trips, but that aspect of backpacking in Montana, Wyoming and Idaho never truly loses its fear factor. Anyway, what spooked the hell out of us that night had nothing to do with brown bears. While we were chilling by our campfire, I distinctly remember we were talking about our upcoming Teton Crest Trail hike later that, if you know that lake, it's pretty huge. We passed only 4 people that day, and every one of them were CDT hikers headed north, the other way. There was essentially no one around but us, and we had that lake to ourselves as far as we knew. One of the more unsettling thoughts going around that campfire was that we knew no one would have been showing up to that shoreline across the lake at that time of night. And if they were insane. That area is very bare, and there's no chance anyone would willingly hike that remote trail in pitch darkness. Even if they got a late start, it's not a trail you could get turned around on or lost on, so the only way you'd ever arrive that late is if you night hiked there willingly. As we were nervously clamoring to figure out what the hell it could be, the light began moving towards us, albeit slowly. It was slow enough that it made us question if it was a trick of perception, but fast enough to make that. But the creepiest part, by far, was when it became clear that it had to be moving towards us. The moment when it was no longer a question. And the reason we knew it was no longer a question is that it was definitely moving over the lake. And, as I said, that lake is big. Now there is only one explanation for that. It was either a boat of some kind, or something that was flying across the lake extremely low and extremely slow for an aircraft. The problem with that is, the only way to get a boat to that lake would be chopper one in and drop it. Obviously, that didn't happen. And this light was way too bright and moving way too fast to be some kind of lightweight pack raft that was hauled in. Beyond that, no one could have rowed that fast, and we already knew that no one would have arrived at that shoreline at that time. Just when it got to the point where we were certain that what we were seeing was not possible. Just about when it seemed that the light had been traveling over that lake's surface for what seemed like a quarter mile, the light winked out, gone, never to reappear. I can assure you, during every part of that trip prior, grizzlies were the number one concern on everyone's mind, being that deep into the backcountry, sleeping overnight at that particular campground. Right at the base of Mount Sheridan's slopes, and on top of a prime water source. I can promise you this, no one had grizzlies on the brain when they were trying to get to sleep in their tents that night. What made it worse is, when we hiked back out the next morning, the only footprints we saw along the shoreline across the lake, where that light had originated, were the ones we left the day before. Still not nearly creepy enough to keep me out of Yellowstone's backcountry. And it shouldn't be for you either, because the place is absolutely magical, alien spacecrafts or not. 2021, me and my friend were camping at Heart o' the Hills campground in Olympic. It was early mid-June, so still before the busiest part of the year, and still kinda chilly. The campground was mostly empty. I wrote this as part of a larger piece on Olympic. June of 2021 was my eagerly anticipated return to the Olympic Peninsula. My lifestyle had dramatically changed, thanks in no small part to Hurricane Ridge and the freedom I felt while there. Since that time, I learned to channel a childhood spent in nature to get closer to the earth. This meant a lot of hiking and camping in the meantime, and allowing myself to get the most from every experience. In my heart, I've learned this to be the purest way to feel the true nature of a land. The Heart o' the Hills campground is located just inside the park entrance. You'll find it near the bottom of Hurricane Ridge Road, but it's still deep in the thick, lush forest. The woods around the grounds are peaceful like you've never felt. The quiet is a level past serene, almost unsettling. Walking a few minutes down any of the nearby trails is enough to really drive home just how deep this forest is. You don't have to be far from the campground. Just a few turns of the trail, and it may as well be gone, replaced with dark forest under a thick canopy. Light filters through and down to the forest floor in the daylight, but night falls swiftly in the forest. Swiftly enough to catch you unprepared. Even at night, when forests come alive, you'll be shocked by the silence around you. In the night, you'll realize just how quiet it was during the day. And that's when you'll cross the line from unsettled to creeped out. You'll realize you hadn't heard a single bird's song all day, or spotted so much as a mosquito or an ant. You'll remember the bright yellow signs pasted through the campground warning you about the predators and scavengers lurking in those hills. And that's when you'll realize these woods could be hiding anything. Perhaps even a Sasquatch. I'd awoke feeling uneasy. We had already slept here a couple nights, and both of those passed without incident. It was late, probably the middle of the night, and so dark I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. Still, I couldn't force myself to fall back to sleep. There was a feeling I couldn't shake, a feeling that something was waiting just outside my tent. Or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. A footstep! Or maybe that was something falling from the canopy above. The quiet. An exhale. Or was that just a gasp of wind slipping between tree trunks in the still night? My mind went back to warnings about securing your food, lest a bear or a mountain lion be lured in. I know I secured my food. Was it enough? God, I hoped so. Did Kent? Did the last people here clean up after themselves? While my mind raced, I lay still in the pitch black night. A twig snapped. My heart stopped. Was impending doom waiting just past the canvas and zipper of my tent? Or was it just a mouse playing games with me? I remained still, clutching my canister of bear spray tight to my chest. Would it even be enough to fend off the untold horrors waiting for me? I laid still for what felt like hours, until I slowly drifted back to sleep. I awoke the next morning unharmed, if you don't count my bruised ego. I couldn't believe I had let my imagination get the best of me. With great humility, I pulled myself together to get on with my day. The foolish feeling faded fast when I spoke with Kent about my night. He listened and then confirmed that he, too, had spent much of the night awake and aware of something waiting and watching just outside of his tent. We investigated our campsite, trying to find any evidence of whatever had investigated us the night before. Alice, it seemed we never had anything to be concerned about. At least that's what the Sasquatch wants you think.